Hi, my name is Kimberly Carfore, and I'm here to tell you about the logic of domination, which is a term coined by ecofeminist Val Plumwood. She's an Australian ecofeminist in her book Feminism and the Mastery of Nature. She talks about the logic of colonization, and another ecofeminist, Karen Warren, talks about the logic of domination. So there's some relationship, but they're not identical. So basically, Val Plumwood is an analytic philosopher, and she's noticed that it's the same underlying logic that men have used to justify the domination of, or people have used to justify the domination of man over woman. And it's the same logic that justifies our extractive mentality when it comes to nature. So humans have this idea that they're dominators over nature, and that culture is valued over nature, so on and so forth. So I'm going to draw a little map on the board, which basically represents logic. The way that I see it is that this map I'm going to draw on the board kind of resides somewhere up here. It's like this map, this mental map that we use to move through the world. So say this is logic. I'm not sure if you can see it. I'll use black. So in order to move through the world, we have to make categories. We have to separate ourselves from the other. We have to see, we have to create an identity. So, I'm a sister, I'm a woman, I identify as a human, I'm also an animal, all these kinds of things. So drawing lines is just the basic nature of moving through the world. However, the problem, what Val Plumwood has observed in modern culture, is that we've learned we exist in the world in binaries, in binary thinking. But the problem is when we create value of one binary over the other, when we create dualisms. So one dualism that exists in the world right now, and this is kind of just trying to get inside the mind of dominator culture, the dominator worldview, the extractive culture, instead of the relational mentality. So first we have male over female. Has historically been, men have been privileged over women. Humans over nature. And I'm drawing lines in between here as well to separate these categories. So culture over nature. Ration over emotion. So I guess we'll start with this. Well, we'll keep going. White over black. Able-bodied over disable-bodied. And so like I said before, the problem with this dualistic thinking is that we learn to value one over the other. And so Plumwood uses 5 terms to kind of flush out the logic of domination. The first one is backgrounding, or denial of dependence. So, for example, we exist in a world where, public over private as well. So the work that is done in the public realm is, given monetary value, is productive, and those on the underbelly, such as reproductive, the work of women, is not even paid. So not only is it not paid, dominator culture moves through the world in the sense that they deny their dependence on the other. And that's another thing. Self is on the top, other is on the bottom. And so we kind of move through the world as rational beings, denying our dependency on the body. Oh, that's another one. The mind over the body. And this is actually a really, really important one, because in the West, the separation of mind and body has done a lot of damage, and in her book, This Changes Everything, Naomi Klein talks about this being the first severance point to where this can all be fleshed out. And so that, climate change and dominator culture, capitalism, is all kind of traced to this mind-body dualism, that we forget that we exist in bodies, and that we think we can move through the world in these rational minds. So yeah, backgrounding is the first one. So in a sense, you benefit from the resources of the other, but you deny that you have any dependence over the other. This happens a lot with women, this happens a lot with our mothers, this happens a lot with nature, of course. It's totally backgrounded. The background to our foreground. Radical exclusion is another term that Val Plumwood talks about. And this is basically hyper-separation. So how the logic of colonization works is that these categories, not only is the top valued over the subjugated other or the bottom, the way that this starts working and creates separation is that you make the other look much different than the top. For example, in this white-black dualism, slaves in the past were given very poor conditions, poor working conditions, poor living conditions, where the white dominator was living in this mansion house, and so that created this hyper-separated sense of self and other, to where the family living in the house looked down at the slaves and being like, oh, they're like uncivilized, they're dirty, but it's the dominator that was giving these others their dirty working conditions. So it creates this hyper separation when they're really not that different. The fifth term that Val Plumwood talks about is incorporation, which just means relational definition. So another way that dominator culture works is that those on the bottom are only defined in relationship to the top. So, for example, male, female, it's just fee added to male, or even man, and then woman. So there's one example of relational definition. Another one, what works here? Relational definition. I think we'll move on. Oh, the sense that they're not autonomous beings. So we think that the body cannot exist outside of the mind, that the mind has to control what the body does. The body has no knowledge of its own. So yeah. The next one is instrumentalization or objectification. And so this is sort of just like those at the bottom have no agency of their own. And so white males in power positions look at nature as just this resource to be extracted. It's just this terra nullius that we can take from and that we can create monetary or gain monetary, have monetary gains from. And so then moving on to the fifth one is homogenization or stereotyping. So it's basically just clumping any one of these categories together, which dominator culture does a lot, that all of these, I mean, those in power have sort of forgotten about huge swaths of humanity just based upon this logic. Those at the bottom don't matter. If you're not a valuable money-making machine, then you're not seen as a valuable being with intrinsic agency of its own. Just existing isn't enough. So yeah, stereotyping. Just saying that any one of these categories are all the same. The female is a good example of this, which you can see in waves of feminism, trying to gain certain agency, and you can't clump all women together. That's something that was definitely brought up in that movement. So one way this is related to what's going on in the world right now is that those at the top have all kind of come together and I'm not sure if you can see in the video, but this is basically a pyramid, and there's a broken line right here. And we can kind of say that this is the 1%. And the 1% has separated themselves from those at the bottom because we've created a civilization which values everything at the top. And fun fact, or not so fun fact, is that a large percent, I think it was 97% of climate change deniers are white male conservatives in power positions who make a lot of money. So that's another one. We can do rich over poor. Rich over poor. I'm not sure if you heard me. And so I think what climate change and all these movements are representing is that those at the bottom are starting to say, hey, you forgot about us, and we don't actually want to be included in your model, in your dominator model, we don't want to be included in this logic. We want a whole new logic. We want a whole new model. And so we can't just take those at the bottom and try to fit them into the top. You could see this happening in second wave feminism when women demanded, when they started to wear shoulder pads. They're literally fitting into the male body, the male frame, trying to get into power positions. And as we can see that, I mean, obviously it worked to some extent, but we moved on to third wave feminism, and we're trying to gain a new sense of what feminism is. And so this is all sort of, it's a structural, a psychological, and a philosophical analysis of dominator culture. And what Val Plumwood is trying to do, she was critiquing the dominant hegemony. And she was saying that rationalization is actually causing the environmental crisis. Obviously, we can't make a one-to-one, this causes this, but it's definitely deeply related to it. And this is the model that she uses to unpack that. A few things happening in the world right now is that an applied sense of the logic of domination would be neoliberalism. I've already mentioned the extractivist economy, which is something that we definitely have to address these days. Digging into Mother Earth is not, it's only not helpful, but it's going to perpetuate some of the worst. It perpetuates this logic of domination, and it's also going to cause a lot of harm in the future. And so what I'm trying to do with unpacking the logic of domination is get at those little points where us at the lower end, us, obviously there, to some extent I'm at the top, we all inhabit many different points in this model, but I definitely identify at the bottom, for the most part, of this in the sense that I'm craving a movement, I'm craving a revolution, I'm craving taking down the system, although that's why I'm bringing up the logic of domination, is because I think it helps get at the tiny weak points so that we can learn how to move through the system instead of just creating a whole new crisis based upon anger and emotions. I think we can all kind of come together and move forward. So this is just a tiny little tidbit of what the logic of domination is, a little bit of ecofeminism, a tiny bit of feminism, and an even tinier bit of climate change. I didn't get into the facts very much, but that's my presentation on the logic of domination, and thank you for listening.